To better understand the odd paradox of black Confederates, we need to be able to tell the difference between black soldiers, black militia, and black civilian personnel attached to the Army in various capacities. Let's start with the black soldiers. With the few fascinating and remarkable exceptions we'll look at in just a moment, the only Confederate Army soldiers who were able to serve openly as black men were the black battalions recruited at the bitter end of the war. This was in March of 1865, when the law allowing black soldiers in the Army barely passed through Congress. A company's worth of African American Southerners from Richmond, mostly slaves, were recruited from among hospital workers into the Confederate States Negro Troops. This unit was designated the 1st Battalion of Negro Troops and was commanded by a white officer. This was the founding cadre, and the plan was to grow the unit to battalion strength, but it was only ever company strength with between 100 and 200 soldiers. To their credit, they were ideal recruits, since many were hospital workers and many had already seen battle as civilian ambulance drivers and hospital orderlies, evacuating wounded rebels from the battlefield, so they were no strangers to war. They also reportedly looked impressive when drilling outside in the public squares of Richmond. However, their barracks was a prison, and they were locked inside when not on duty, reflecting white society's lingering paranoia about slave insurrections. Oddly enough, these guys did spend a few days on the front line, but they didn't do much since most weren't armed. Ironically, they saw more combat as civilian laborers than they did as Confederate soldiers. Next, we have what the War Department hoped would be the 2nd Battalion of Negro Troops, and this unit was below company strength. This founding company, if you could call it a company, was commanded by Anglo-American Major Thomas P. Turner, and had a whopping 35 volunteers as of March 27th. Just 2 weeks before Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse. By volunteers, in many cases I mean slaves voluntold by their owners, some of whom believed fanatically in the Confederate cause and were willing to sacrifice some slaves either to death on the battlefield or freedom through military service in order to save the rebellion and keep the rest of their slaves forever. In other cases, there were slaves and freemen who wanted to use this as an opportunity for advancement, and as far as the slaves, their owners allowed them to go, with the owners collecting their pay. That said, Robert E. Lee complained in his letters in March of 1865 about so many slave owners in Northern Virginia being unwilling to lend their slaves to the Army to save their country. As far as the black Confederate soldiers of March 1865, their total military service for the CSA lasted just under a month. I still haven't encountered any evidence that they served long enough to ever get paid. Not that their pay would have been worth much in 1865, but in either case, their owners would have collected their pay. Surely some of these volunteers did feel an affinity and strong emotional bond for their owners and for their local communities. Stockholm Syndrome and, in many cases, mixed-race family relations were a weird thing that often accompanied master-slave relationships. That said, one group existed for the benefit of the other, and not the other way around. And that one group did not have the freedom to leave this arrangement. There's plenty of evidence of the weird Stockholm Syndrome type relationship between body servants and their owners, but we know little about the enslaved soldiers who served in 1865. We can ascertain that many, if not most of the volunteers saw the writing on the wall just as well as the white soldiers who were deserting en masse since 1864. That the war was already lost, and that these black volunteers were fighting specifically to earn their freedom through military service, which they would have gotten either by completing their contracts with the rebel army or by being captured by the Union. This makes me respect those individual slaves for their willingness to go to war and risk their lives in battle to earn their sacred freedom. I don't mean freedom as in Confederate independence or Southern nationalism, but as in real, individual self-ownership and agency. That said, none of these inspiring acts by incredible black Americans in the South changed the fact that the Confederate States Army existed to protect and uphold the government created to preserve slavery and expand it to new territories.